Let's talk about the prime minister. He was just in New York at the kind of the tail end of his trip at the UN, talking to the UN Secretary General. How has the trip gone for him? He's had the White House meet and greets. He's had the press conferences, meetings with lots of congressional leaders. What's the upshot of this?
Well, I mean, this meeting is a win-win. It went well for Prime Minister Lee, but it went well for President Biden. And this meeting really had to happen because, as you recall, President Biden was supposed to meet with all the leaders of ASEAN this week in Washington, D.C. That got postponed. And because ASEAN is so critical, while Singapore is not a stand-in for ASEAN, of course, Singapore is a critical part of ASEAN. It's a critical part of President Biden's recently announced Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So to have this bilateral meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Lee was really important to the United States. And of course, it was important to Singapore too.
And it just seemed so positive, Steve, didn't it? They seemed so united on the Ukraine, on the matters in Myanmar, on US having closer ties to the Indo-Pacific region and helping to push its stability. As you say, it just seemed a win-win all around. What were the standout issues or talking points for you?
Well, I think that what was really, the core part of this from the Asia Pacific perspective is getting that message to the US that, look, we have to have relationships with China here. We must engage, and we will engage with China. They are our biggest. They're the biggest country in the region, of course. They're the economic powerhouse in the region. They're the political and military powerhouse in the region. So the prime minister talking about the need for an affirmative policy from the United States, where the United States is going to engage with concrete, meaningful ways in the Indo-Pacific, as the United States is now calling it. That's really important. And you'll notice that the United States Trade Representative Catherine Tai, USTR, just announced, I think it was today, that she is going to be in Singapore this coming week. And she's going to be talking exactly about what the Prime Minister talked about. And what the Prime Minister's message was that the U.S. is going to bring concrete, economically meaningful benefits to the region. And it's that affirmative approach that the Prime Minister underscored is so important.
And just to follow up on that, the subject of China did come up several times. One journalist rather clumsily referred to Singapore as the China whisperer, which it was very interesting that PM Lee pushed back on that straight away and expressed the value and importance of being an important player for both East and West.
Well, and you know what, though, I think what the reporter probably meant by China whisperer is because of the relationship between Singapore and China for decades now, because of the length of PM Lee's tenure, because of the respect that PM Lee is held both in China and the U.S., Prime Minister Lee can help explain to U.S. negotiators, U.S. leaders, China better than most people can. So China whisperer is not that President Lee is there to give China's message that he's a mouthpiece for China. It's that he can explain what's happening from both perspectives, both the Singapore perspective, the Chinese perspective, and of course he knows the U.S. perspective. And he really is critical to helping the U.S. as they frame the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And I think that's why, look, the Indo-Pacific strategy the Biden administration came out with, it could have been an anti-China strategy. It could have been a containment strategy. It could have been a strategy about democracies versus autocracies. And it really isn't. It's really an affirmative strategy. And that message that Prime Minister Lee and others, including those in the business community, have been giving to the U.S. seems to have hit home.
It'll be interesting to see what Catherine Tai says here on those concrete steps that they're taking, because so far it's been a whole lot of reaffirming of relationships and very little meat on the bone. So we'll see what comes through next week when she's here in Singapore, as you mentioned.